So before I actually start my talk, because this is a very special Megalithomania meeting here, Michell has just passed on into spirit. The whole conference is dedicated to him. And so before I start my talk, I'd like to ask, first of all, how many of you here knew John personally, or had seen him speak, or had seen him walking around Glastonbury? How many people knew John? The majority. Great, okay. And how many of you have read at least one of the following titles? The View Over Atlantis, The New View Over Atlantis, Dimensions of Paradise, or City of Revelation? Okay, the majority. Okay, great. I mean, it's okay if you haven't, but I was just kind of curious about that. Okay, so these pictures are of a man you know very well. It's John Michell. They were taken at a cafe in London in 2007, on the Portobello Road, actually. And in the lower right is something that's probably very familiar to you. That's the New Jerusalem diagram, for which John is so well known. In that diagram, the number 1080, or 1080, plays a very important role, and if you've read John's work, you know about that. This number represents intuition and inspiration. As a writer, John combined a huge amount of intuition and inspiration with an equally great measure of focused and rational grasp of his subjects, and the results were often astonishing. John was a leading light in several fields. Given the nature of his production, it's a great honor to have worked with him as a collaborator. Here you see him holding the manuscript for How the World is Made. This is his only book that remains unpublished. Besides the many people that John has influenced, he's had a very interesting history of collaborations with artists, designers, and researchers, including Richard Adams, Una Woodruff, Bob Rickard, John Neal, Marilee Harper, Robin Heath, and Alan Brown. A very illustrious crew. I know that John regretted the delay in publication of this particular manuscript, and we, at the very least, very deeply regret that John is no longer with us. So to make myself feel a little bit better about this loss, I've made up a fantasy, a little story, and it goes like this. Not gone, just temporarily dematerialized, as you can see. He's standing under a red light. This was taken more or less at the same time as the other ones, but there was a red light above. Very typical stance of John, as you can see, with his cigarette. In this picture, John's standing next to a photo of the Rosette Nebula. That's a star-forming region in the constellation Monoceros. And I've put that there to symbolize John's ability to inspire and to catalyze. In the upper right-hand corner is the Eagle Nebula. I've put that there to symbolize John's qualities as a far-seeing visionary. The red nebula that looks like a flower on the bottom is the Cat's Eye Nebula, and that's one of the most complex and beautiful ones ever seen, apparently. It represents John's sense of beauty and his keen intelligence. This nebula also features unusual shock-induced knots of gases, and that stands for John's trickster qualities, switching things around, reversing received ideas, and forever turning the tables to reveal the unexpected. Anybody who knew John knows that about him. On the left, you see the cover of the first edition of 12 Tribe Nations and the Science of Enchanting the Landscape. Little ad here, copies are on sale downstairs. Also, most of the other books mentioned in my talk. On the right, you see the cover of the second edition. This just came out in the USA in late 2008 with Inner Traditions. The subtitle was changed to Sacred Number and the Golden Age. John himself always gave 12 tribe nations an important place among all his books. It connects two of his major works, The View Over Atlantis and The Dimensions of Paradise. It shows how the ideal cosmological pattern okay, right, I don't have to bend down that way. Okay, great. The ideal cosmological pattern, that's the New Jerusalem diagram we saw earlier, was applied in the organization of traditional societies in many parts of the world. Okay. Cosmologically ordered societies are aligned with the unchanging truth of mathematics and its expressions in nature, as author Michael Schneider has so well said. Hello? Okay, the universal 12 tribes, okay, all over the world, there are records and traditions of nations divided into 12 tribes and 12 regions. Each tribe and each region corresponded to one of the signs of the zodiac and one of the months of the year. Most widely known are the 12 tribes of Israel, but there have been many others. The purpose of such a structure was to provide unity to traditional societies. The plan was a symbolic chart of the heavens. This was divided into 12 constellations and governed by 12 principal gods. The earth became a mirror of the heavens, as we've been repeating here in different ways for the whole weekend. That is, in essence, one of our branches of study here. The recurrent archetype. The pattern of 12 around 1 is a recurrent archetype. It haunts the imagination, and it always remains a source of inspiration. At the end of my talk, we're going to look at an interesting recurrence in the modern world. Wherever we find the legend of 12 gods, 12 saints, or 12 heroes who sanctified their surroundings, there we may look for an ancient sacred landscape divided into 12 astrological segments. On the left, we see an ancient Roman altar with the 12 gods and goddesses in a circle. The signs of the zodiac are carved on the outer edge of this altar, which is in Paris, actually the original, in the Louvre. To the right are the 12 Greek gods and goddesses, each with a characteristic emblem and connected with a zodiac sign. Systems of 12 gods that corresponded to the division of the year into 12 months and the heavens into 12 astrological houses were adopted in ancient Egypt, Phoenicia, Chaldea, Persia, and throughout the East. This is a view of the Tibetan national flag, a bit blurry, but it's there. The 6 original tribes of Tibet are symbolized by the 6 red rays on this flag. In some accounts, there are said to have been 12 Tibetan tribes. Their representatives formed the Circular Council under the Dalai Lama. On the other side of the world, in the USA, south of the Great Lakes, the Winnebago Indians had a 12-clan society in which 4 superior clans represented the heavenly quarters. This diagram represents the constitution of Athens, as described by Aristotle in the 4th century BC. At the center is the Acropolis, with its sanctuary. The 4 quarters and the 12 tribes are defined by radii. Each tribe was divided into 30 clans or families. These are represented by the 360 lines that correspond to the 360 degrees of a circle. Aristotle says, and I'm quoting, "They were made into 4 groups in imitation of the seasons of the year. Each group was split into 3 tribes, making 12 in all, the same number as the months. The tribes each consisted of 30 clans, like the days in a month, and there were 30 men to each clan." Here we're looking at a map showing the sites of known leagues or amphictyonies in the ancient world. The word amphictyony means dwellers around a central shrine. There were many in the Greek world, and there are 17 on this sketch map. I'm going to point out just a few of them. Okay, E is Delphi, center of the Delphic amphictyony. J is Athens, center of the Athenian amphictyony. K is Delos, center of the Delian amphictyony, and L is Troy, center of the Trojan amphictyony. Now, not all leagues or amphictyonies were of strictly 12 members, but 12 was the original and conventional number in such unions. This map shows cities in ancient Etruria, which is now Tuscany, north of Rhone. There was an Etruscan league of 12 member cities. The names of all 12 cities are not completely known, nor do we know the exact location of their central shrine and meeting place. Scholars have generally located it around the southern shore of Lake Balsina. French scholar Jean Richet, and I'll be speaking about him a little bit more later, has located it in the town of Montefiascone on the southern shore of Lake Balsina. And the divisions, the 12-part divisions, are a suggested scheme for the division of Etruria into 12 sectors. Livy and other historians speak of another 12-tribe city in North Italy above the river Po. Its center was probably Mantua. Another 12-city league was south of Rome, centered on Capua. This is what happens if, no. This is a painting by the 16th century artist Arcimboldo. It depicts the god Vertumnus and is also a portrait of the Emperor Rudolph II. Vertumnus was the male aspect of the ancient Etruscan deity of vegetation and fertility, originally the goddess Voltumna. In the center of the Etruscan League was the Fanum, or the sacred place of Voltumna. The Etruscans gathered there every year for a national festival and trading fair. Solemn games took place, a religious synod met for debates, and representatives of the 12 cities took counsel together. In early days, the delegates were the 12 kings of their respective tribes, and one of their number presided as High King. On the left is a painting of Valhalla from a 17th century manuscript. Odin, the divine ancestor of the Norsemen, stands before his house with 12 doors. On the top right is a diagram. This is a zodiac of the gods of Valhalla with Odin in the center. On the bottom right, we see the three worlds, the world tree, and the topographical symbols of Odin's realm. Odin lived in a region called Midgard, the middle space or world center. It was surrounded by a circular wall and rings of mountains and oceans. Within it lay Asgard, home of the Aesir, the 12 gods. In countries where Odin and the 12 gods were worshipped, ritual centers or things, or also pronounced tings, were designed on the pattern of Asgard. Examples are Tingwald in the Shetland Islands, Dingwald in Scotland, and Tynwald on the Isle of Man. 12 was the customary number of magistrates who assembled at Scandinavian things, the same number as today makes up an Anglo-Saxon jury. At the top is a map of Iceland. It had 4 ritual divisions of north, south, east, and west, which I'm sort of tracing with the laser pointer here. Each quarter was divided into 3 sections, with a chief elected governor and 2 subordinates to rule the sections on either side of him. The main picture is a 19th century depiction by W.G. Collingwood that shows Iceland's traditional midsummer gathering, the Althing. The central regions of Iceland are mostly frozen desert, so that although the Althing was conceptually in the middle of the country, it was not geologically so. In the year 930, it was established at Thingvellir in the southeastern part of the island. This is Reykjavik, so about 30 miles east of Reykjavik, held below a towering rock where the island's main geological fault had caused a dramatic rift, a narrow chasm with outstanding magical qualities. Madagascar, off the southeast coast of Africa, is about 1,000 miles north to south. The people are now united in the Republic of Malagasy, but until the end of the 19th century, when the French invaded, they were in different tribes. The administration of the central region, Imarina, was a classic example of 12-tribe amphictyonic government. Antananarivo and the whole country around it were divided into 4 quarters, representing the 4 directions and seasons of the year. A paramount chief was set over each division. The people were divided into 12 tribes. Each had its king and corresponded to a sign of the zodiac and a month of the year. The photos to the right are late 19th century. On the top is a river scene in the forest, and on the bottom is a megalithic stone gateway in one of the ancient towns in Imarina. Also in Africa, the Ashanti people had a 12-tribe nation whose last king was deposed in 1896. On the right is Mount Kailash in western Tibet. On the left, a depiction of the sacred geography of the world with Mount Meru at its center. Hindu Puranic symbolism depicts this as a 12-petaled lotus. Traditions throughout Asia speak of a central mountain that provides the main link between heaven and earth. It is surrounded by a plain, which is the original Garden of Eden, and it's divided into quarters by the 4 rivers of paradise. At the 4 quarters are 4 smaller mountains, each symbolizing an element, and beyond are 7 rings of mountains to represent the 7 stages of creation and planetary orbits. Further out are the 4 main island continents of the world, each flanked by 2 smaller islands. Some people believe that Mount Kailash, sacred to 4 religions, is identical with Mount Meru. If that is so, then it's where the gods first gave the law for all 12 tribe nations. The charts on the bottom compare Irish and Chinese cosmology. On the left, the 4 provinces around Meath at the center of ancient Ireland and their symbolic attributes. Their general characteristics are comparable to those of the 4 quarters in Chinese cosmology to the right. This pattern of 4 around a center is the basis of the traditional diagram behind the cosmologically ordered societies. From it develops the 12-fold order of courts and pantheons. On the top, as you no doubt recognize, the prehistoric earthworks of the Hill of Tara. These enclose the great hall and ritual center of Ireland's High King, the place of assembly for the hierarchy of the 4 quarters. Here are 3 sketch maps of Ireland. On the left is the genesis of a pentagonal division of Ireland. Lines drawn diagonally between the coastal boundary points of Ireland's 4 provinces meet to form angles of 72 degrees. That's the one on the top and the one on the bottom. One of these is bisected by a line to the boundary mark between East and West Munster. The lines cross at the hill of Usnech, 40 miles west of Tara. There a pillar marked the Umphalos of Ireland. The middle map shows the addition of a line due east-west and the extension of the line that separates in East and West Munster that is extended north. The line due east-west supports the pentagonal scheme. And on the right, we see how all this develops into a 12-part division. The sacred divisions of Ireland under the solar rule of a High King. The extreme east, west, and south points of the country, the east-west line and the meeting points of the provincial boundaries are interconnected. The enclosing oval symbolizes the world egg of Druid cosmology. Here we have Wales. Its 13 ancient counties include Monmouth, which is now part of England. They can be seen as the traditional pattern of 12 round a 13th. On the top right is Plinlimmon, a 5-peaked mountain, the old symbolic center of the country. The highest point on Plinlimmon can be called the center of Wales. In the diagram, a circle drawn from this point contains the extremities of the country and defines its natural geographical borders. A few miles southeast of Plinlimmon is a district that suggests itself as the ritual center of ancient Wales. The photo bottom right gives a view of it. This is the wild district of Cumdoider. This was probably the core of the system and the realm of a former High King. The lines that define the 12-part diagram link cathedral sites, ancient sites of perpetual choirs, and the furthest headlands of the south and west coasts. To the right, an engraving by 19th century artist Gustave Doré of King Arthur and the 12 Knights. This legend preserves the memory of zodiacal 12 tribe divisions of all Celtic territories. Regular gatherings of the 12 knights or tribal chiefs first took place in forest sanctuaries. To the left is King Arthur's Round Table in the Castle of Winchester. It marks the aspirations of English kings to revive the enchanted realm of Celtic legend. Other instances of groups of 12 include St. Joseph of Arimathea and his disciples, the 12 hermits of Glastonbury and St. Patrick, St. Columban and his 12 monks, St. Petroc and his 12 followers, and the 12 apostles of Ireland under St. Finian. And here's the familiar Glastonbury zodiac that artist Catherine Maltwood identified on the Somerset landscape in 1929. From studying the landscape, maps, and aerial photographs, she identified a circle about 10 miles in diameter containing 12 astrological effigies, delineated by the shape of hills, streams, and other landscape features. Their relative positions agreed with a map of the constellations. Some local legends and folklore seem to refer to them. The Glastonbury zodiac is a powerful symbol that evokes ancient memories. Whether or not she was right in her interpretation of it, her perception of an astrological pattern at Glastonbury is well-founded and effective. And behind all the examples we've seen of 12 tribe societies, there's one original model. The pattern they imitate is the slowly revolving zodiac in the heavens. Western literature has two famous examples of this cosmological formula, described in both cases as an ideal city. One of them is Plato's description of Magnesia in his book, The Laws. The other is in the book of Revelation by St. John, who described the New Jerusalem, where the 12 tribes of Israel would one day reassemble. These two cities are essentially the same. The New Jerusalem diagram here is a schematic reconstruction of Plato's 12-tribe state. The dark sectors represent the common ground for roads or paths between tribal boundaries. The two inner circles represent the city, with the Acropolis at the center, surrounded by cultivated land. Around the outside are hills with temples. This figure is an image of the canon of harmonies and proportions that set the pattern for all 12 tribe societies. While the number 7 symbolizes the movement of spirit and the wandering tribes, the number 12 represents settlement and civilization. On the right, you see how the framework of the New Jerusalem 12-tribe diagram accommodates the 28 points of the lunar cycle, as well as a 7-pointed figure. Here you see that one shaded. The 7 represents the septenary and the 7 planets. In the sanctuaries of Thebes and Eleusis, the 7 was considered as the symbol of the soul of the world. And here's another reason why 12 around 1 is such a powerful pattern. If we take 12 equal spheres and pack them closely, they will all touch a central 13th sphere. This volume was known and studied in ancient times. It appears in galena and other crystals. It is called a cuboctahedron. Buckminster Fuller had a special name for it, a Dymaxion. Its shape is a graph of forces in balance in every direction. Its 12 lines radiate from the center as vector equilibrium or a truss. The shape balances three-dimensional forces most effectively. So whether in 2 or in 3 dimensions, 12 around 1 embodies wholeness and unity. It's a universal module of structure, function, order. Besides cosmology, geomancy, astronomy, and astrology, the most important science that contributed to the cohesion of 12 tribe societies was music. And enchantment, as the name implies, is created by chanting. Here we see 12 angels, each with a different musical instrument, carved on the minstrel's gallery at Exeter Cathedral. They recall the days when a 12-section Gregorian chant upheld a religious enchantment over tribes and countries. In China, the 12 semitones in the scale corresponded to certain lengths of pipe, each with its own pitch. And these also served as standard units of measure. Many composers, ancient and modern, have created musical zodiacs. These place 12 notes in the scale under 12 zodiacal signs and attempt to represent the music of the spheres. On the left is a diagram of the oldest surviving tone zodiac from Harmonics by Ptolemy in the 1st century AD. He equates the Greek 2-octave scale with the 12 signs. Modern compositions have generally been based on the single octave, equally tempered chromatic scale. To the right is a tone zodiac by Michael McMullen, an Irish musicologist. Other tone zodiacs are arranged differently. Interpretations of celestial music in astrologically ordered societies no doubt varied from one society to the other. A little bit of water. Okay, so here is Mount Parnassus above Delphi, the Oracle Center in Greece. French scholar Jean Richet wrote several books about 12-part zodiacal societies and their sacred geography. Richet became very well known after World War II for his work on poet Gérard de Nerval. In 1958, while he was staying in Athens, on the mountain sacred to Gaia, he had a dream of a statue of Apollo turning 180 degrees to face him. This led to his identifying a line of Apollo sites linking Athens, Delphi, and Delos. Richet eventually identified 3 major 12-part divisions centered on Delphi, Delos, and Sardis in the ancient world, which you can see there. And another one centered on the oasis of Siwa in Egypt, down Ammonion, down the Ammonion oasis of Siwa. This map gives you the overview. In the course of his research, Richet made many interesting discoveries about the zodiacal significance of ancient art. He found that references to stars, constellations, and zodiac signs were part of the design of temples, sculpture, coins, vases, and even shield designs, all part of this grand theme that placed whole societies and individual actions within the zodiacal cosmos. Here we have Jean Richet's main axis of Greek sacred geography. This is a straight line between principal Apollonian oracle centers. The points are from left to right: A, Kerkyras, Corfu; B, Delphi; C, Athens; D, Perseus; E, Delos; and F, Lindos in Rhodes. This line marks the Virgo-Pisces direction of the zodiac centered on Delphi. Here are reconstructive drawings of 2 colossal statues. On the left is the Colossus at Rhodes, a figure of the sun god. It was erected in 279 BC and stood for 56 years until an earthquake toppled it. Colossal statues were known in antiquity throughout Greece and beyond. They are thought to have had astrological significance, denoting the god who reigned over the territory where each was placed. To the right is the colossal Athena that stood in the Acropolis of Athens. On the main axis of Greek sacred geography that we just saw, statues and temples of Apollo were usually accompanied by those of Athena, the patroness of Greece. The statues of Apollo here are of the type, the Kouros statue that Richer saw in his dream. The drawing above is of the northeast pediment of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. The images that appeared on many temple pediments indicated their position in relation to the sacred center through a vocabulary of zodiacal imagery. Here is the Apollo St. Michael line of Western Europe. 10 years after Jean Richer published his Sacred Geography of the Ancient Greeks, his brother, Lucien, also interested in sacred geography, extended the line in both directions. Southeast, it goes to Mount Carmel, the sacred mountain of the Canaanites in the Holy Land. Northwest, at an angle of almost 60 degrees west of north, it cuts the main sanctuaries in Europe dedicated to the Archangel Michael. The points are from left to right, as you can see. One is Skellig Michael, so coming down toward the southeast, Skellig Michael, St. Michael's Mount, Mont Saint-Michel, Bourges, Sacre de Saint-Michel, Saint-Michel in Garfagnana, Perugia, and so on, Delos, Lindos, and Mount Carmel. Okay, the first point on this 2,500-mile long line, as defined by Jean and Lucien Richer, is Skellig Michael. This is the holy rock of the Archangel off the west coast of Ireland. From as early as the 6th century, the Archangel was patron saint of a Celtic monastery there. His reported apparition must have been early in the 5th century. Skellig Michael was a powerful attraction for pilgrims. Climbing the rock and kissing the spur at the summit high over the sea was a dangerous ordeal. In the early 1990s, Paul Broadhurst and Hamish Miller, together with Vivienne Shanley and Ba Russell, began an odyssey of some 10 years traveling along this Apollo St. Michael line with Hamish acting as dowser. Here are some of the rocky peaks or islands that stand on the Apollo St. Michael line. To the left are two different views of St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall. Top right, Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, and below right, Sacre de Saint-Michel in Piedmont. These were places of pilgrimage and visions of the Archangel. Once Broadhurst and Miller had completed their odyssey, the results of their investigations appeared in the book Dance of the Dragon in 2000. They doused the straight line originally established by the Richer brothers as two irregularly interwoven curves and renamed it the Apollo-Athena line. To the left, a picture of Le Puy in France, the most dramatic of St. Michael's sites. This is a church to the Archangel perched on the summit of a towering rock, the Needle. To the right, a sketch of a cave painting at Monte Gargano showing episodes in the legend of St. Michael. The top left box inset in that drawing is Garganus shooting at a bull. The returning arrow pierced him in the eye. This prodigy was followed by an apparition of the Archangel. This meant that the cave of Gargano should be dedicated as a sanctuary of St. Michael. This little map shows the Apollo St. Michael line going through Delos. This small island is the hub of the Cycladic Islands and the birthplace of Apollo. It was the former center of an ancient amphictyony. While working on 12 Tribe Nations, I undertook to translate Jean Richer's book, Sacred Geography of the Ancient Greeks. After many delays and frustrations, it was published finally by State University of New York Press in 1994. I had first discovered Richet's work in a Paris bookshop in 1986. During the course of my translation, I visited Jean Richet in the south of France, and I also met Lucien briefly in Paris. Jean Richet's book on sacred geography and zodiacal symbolism were repeatedly awarded prestigious prizes by the French Academy. As far as I know, these are the only books on sacred geography that have been so recognized. Okay, this is a view of Mount Carmel, sacred at different times to Baal, Zeus, and other gods of the elements. It juts out from the coast of the Holy Land and forms the eastern end of the Apollo-St. Michael line as the Richet brothers defined it. One of the holy sages who frequented Mount Carmel was Pythagoras. A grotto in Mount Carmel, the cave of the sons of the prophet, was inhabited by the prophet Elijah. On the edge of modern Haifa, it is still a place of prayer sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. From ancient times, it was famous for its healing properties. Nearby was the once famous oracle. Here briefly are two interpretations of St. Michael. This radiant archangel inherited some of the attributes of Apollo, Woden, and the Celtic Belinus. He has authority over two worlds, above and below. As leader of the heavenly hosts, he slays demons, dragons, and earth monsters. He is also the guide to the mysteries of death and the underworld. His main emblems are the solar sphere, shown on the left in Dürer's St. Michael quelling the dragon of 1498, and on the right the scales in which he weighs the qualities of dead souls, as in this detail of Rogier van der Weyden's The Last Judgment. And here, as most of you know, is the St. Michael line of England. John Michell identified it in 1967 and described it in The View over Atlantis. It's the longest straight line that can be drawn through southern England. Its point of balance is roughly halfway along its course at the great prehistoric temple of Avebury, which is point 8 on this map. West of Avebury, the most spectacular of St. Michael's sanctuaries fall either directly on the line or beside it, including from left to right, St. Michael's Carnbray, St. Michael's Mount, St. Michael's Chapel, Roche Rock, 4, the Cheese Ring, 5, St. Michael's Brentor, 6, St. Michael's Borough Ridge, 7, St. Michael's Glastonbury Tor, 8, Avebury, 9, St. George's Ogborne St. George, 10, Royston Cave, and 11, Abbey, Bury St. Edmunds. Okay, the painting top left is St. Michael's Church on Boroughbridge Mump, and lower right, a very pudding-like Glastonbury Tor. The exact bearing of the whole St. Michael line is defined by the cluster of sites in its central section. From the center of Boroughbridge Mump to the west, a straight line passes through St. Michael's Tower on Glastonbury Tor and the southern entrance stones of Avebury to the ancient church site at Ogborne St. George. Okay, here are some more sites along the St. Michael line, which are, I'm sure, very familiar, but it's always worth repeating these things, when we put them in a new context. So some more sites here. To the top left, the Cheese Ring, a mysterious towering pile of rocks. Bottom left, a brooding St. Michael's Church on the rock at Brentor. To the right, William Stukely's ground plan of Avebury in 1724. The St. Michael line passes through the large stones at the southern gateway, where the Kennet Avenue enters the ring. For many years, the St. Michael line has been studied or experienced by dowsers, artists, mystics, surveyors, and so on, musicians. Paul Broadhurst and Hamish Miller doused it as the Michael and Mary line and reported their experiences in The Sun and the Serpent of 1989. And now back to 12-tribe traditions. This diagram displays information about the chorography of Ptolemy. A chorography is a symbolic grouping of nations according to astrological and geomantic considerations. The word comes from the Greek choros, a country or region. Chorography was a traditional practice formerly used much as topography is now to chart a region with the features of its various parts. Ptolemy's chorography is the most complex of all subsisting ones. It is not easy to reconcile with actual geography, but it is still taken as authoritative by modern practicing astrologers. The chorography tradition goes back to ancient Egypt and Babylon. The text box lower right, shows first the signs of the zodiac, then Paul of Alexandria's chorography in his work Isagoge of 378 AD, and third, the chorography implied in Acts of the Apostles in the Bible. The two are similar but not identical. In the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, verses 9 to 11, we have the description of the first Pentecost, when many different peoples were gathered together and spoke in tongues. I'm quoting now. Parthians and Medes and Elamites and the dwellers in Mesopotamia and in Judea and Cappadocia, in Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, in Egypt and in the parts of Libya about Cyrene, and strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes and Arabians, we do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of God. The map diagram is a reconstruction of the chorography of Pentecost. This suggests how the tradition of a chorography of 12 nations was revived through the Christian revelation. After the crucifixion, the 12 apostles divided the known world between themselves. Each took one of the 12 sections as his mission field. At the Nicene Council, Constantine identified them with the 12 zodiacal signs around Christ the Son. The center of the chorography of Pentecost that we just saw works at Sardis in Asia Minor. The drawing on the left shows the ruins of the temple of Artemis Cybele. Behind it lies the pyramid-shaped rock above Sardis. It forms a natural symbol of Mount Meru, the world center mountain. To the right is a statue of Artemis at Ephesus. Around her neck, she's wearing a necklace of the signs of the zodiac. According to Jean Richet, the sign placed centrally on the breast of such statues refers to the zodiacal sector in which the statue was located. Here, looks like Scorpio. One of the zodiacs that Richet identified is also centered at Sardis, like the chorography of Pentecost. And now to the best known, the most well-known of the 12 tribes. These are the 12 tribes of Israel. And to the right, we see a painting of Mount Sinai, where Moses received the tablets of the law. Their right to possess the Holy Land was given to them by their God, Jehovah. The diagram left shows the order of encampment in the wilderness as indicated in the biblical book of Numbers, chapter 2. The tabernacle is in the center, surrounded by a circle of Levites, and 4 sets of 3 tribes camp around that point according to the 4 quarters. The tribes of Israel formed an astrological system, but the correspondence between them and the signs has never been precisely established. Other sets of 12 tribes arose in the Holy Land. These include the 12 sons of Ishmael. They became princes of the 12 tribes whose descendants are the Arabic nations. And here we have another geomantic appreciation of the Holy Land. The map on the left shows a corridor that includes most of the great sanctuaries and places of vision mentioned in the Old and New Testaments. On the right is an artistic interpretation of the natural geomancy of the Holy Land. The mountain ranges can be seen as dragons or sources of sacred energy, and the River Jordan as a tree of life. The mountains in the range west of the Jordan are aligned with the sanctuaries to create the corridor of vision through the Holy Land. These are 3 sites on this corridor. Above left, the sacred rock of Mount Gerizim, called the navel of the Holy Land. Below left, Jacob's Well, painted by George Richmond in 1828. On the right, Mount Tabor, the site of the transfiguration of Jesus. Other sites include Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Shiloh, Endor, and Mount Lebanon. We now zoom into Jerusalem for the next few slides. To the left is a diagram of Solomon's Temple as reconstructed by Dr. Asher Kaufman in the 1980s. 70s and 80s he was publishing. Point C marks the court of women. Point B is the main temple, sanctuary or hekal, and point A is the Holy of Holies. Okay, in the picture to the right, you see a sort of Moorish canopy over a rock. This is called the Dome of the Spirits. In the background is the Muslim Dome of the Rock. Solomon's temple was destroyed in 586 BC, rebuilt and destroyed several times, and then finally demolished by the Romans in 70 AD. The place where it stood was forgotten and long remained a mystery. It was assumed that the Jews' rock of foundation where the ark stood in Solomon's temple was identical to the rock beneath the Muslims' Dome of the Rock, which is obviously a potential source of embarrassment and conflict. Clues to the location of the temple came to Dr. Asher Kaufman through studying the books of Ezekiel, Numbers, the Mishnah, as well as archaeological remains and the topography of the site. He found that the Dome of the Spirits, that you see in the foreground, had once stood in the Holy of Holies. A very interesting alignment coincides with the axis of the first temple of Solomon. This is called, we call this the Messianic Lay. In this map of North Jerusalem, the Messianic Lay is the horizontal line in the center of the diagram. It passes from east at the Mount of Olives to the west through the southern edge of the Golden Gate, which is marked point C, along the axis of the former temple, which is shaded, over the Dome of the Spirits, marked B, and onto the Rock of Golgotha, point A. Golgotha lies inside Constantine's 4th century Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that's shaded in the diagram. The Messianic Lay thus connects 2 of the world's most sacred rocks. These are Golgotha, the central symbol of Christianity, and the Jews' rock of foundation. Also note the lines GH and HI. These are the Cardo Maximus and the Decumanus as laid out by the Roman Emperor Hadrian. Also note point G the site of Hadrian's column, from which start 3 streets at an angle. And those 3 streets at an angle are going to play an important role in the geometry of Jerusalem. Okay, the top inset is Eric Cohn's reconstruction. It's a portion of Eric Cohn's reconstruction of Jerusalem's Roman street patterns from the available archaeological evidence. And there you see those 3 streets again. And the main picture is Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. The 2 blocked doorways of the Golden Gate, right there, near the center of the outer wall, are said to be on the foundation of a gate built by Solomon. It has been sealed up ever since the Saracen conquest in 1187. The Jews expect that when the future Messiah comes to Jerusalem, he will enter through the Golden Gate. Christians believe the same of Jesus at his second coming. He has already passed through the Golden Gate on Palm Sunday, when he rode into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. The Muslim legend is that on the Day of Judgment, the angel Gabriel will sound 3 blasts on a ram's horn to announce the resurrection. The souls of those rewarded with eternal life will pass over a bridge as thin as a hair, as sharp as a sword, and as black as night, stretching from the mount to the Golden Gate. From the map of Jerusalem's northern quarters and the Roman street pattern, a pentagon may be drawn. Here you see that we've shifted. We now see east is at the bottom. It is centered on the Messianic lay, this pentagon, yeah. 3 of its lines are marked by streets of the Roman period or earlier, and its eastern side defines the west end of the former temple. To the right, in the diagram to the right, a reciprocal pentagon is added, okay? Reciprocal pentagon, a figure that John was very fond of. This is an upside down and interlocking pentagon. Inside it, a series of smaller pentagrams, star shapes, show that the exact center lies upon the rock of Golgotha. John Michell later wrote a short monograph called The Revelation of the Temple, which further develops the geometry of Jerusalem. A relationship of harmonious proportion exists between the plan of Solomon's temple, the geometry of Jerusalem, and the Messianic lay. If the dimensions of the temple are multiplied by 6, we obtain an area that appears in shading in the diagram. The next slide is exactly the same, but minus the shading. The east wall of the enlarged temple coincides with the east wall of the city, which I showed you, I think. Have I shown that to you? This one? And the Golden Gate forms the main entrance to the eastern temple court. Golgotha and part of the Holy Sepulchre lie within the inner sanctum in front of the Holy of Holies. Okay, so if you remember, this square bit was the Holy of Holies. Here is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and Golgotha. The front of the main temple is the front of the main temple sanctuary. The Hekal here is aligned with the Cardo Maximus. This is the prophesied temple of reconciliation. Its appearance is connected with the fulfillment of Jerusalem's messianic destiny. The revelation of the Temple of Jerusalem represents the unity of the symbolic 12 tribes. As an archetype, 12 tribe structures haunt the imagination, ever return to the idealistic mind, and are always a source of inspiration and renewal. And we're now going to look at a modern example of the recurrence of 12 as an archetype of dynamic human unity. In South India stands a unique building called Mandir, recently completed. It is a nearly spherical building that represents the sun rising from the earth. Inside, the large inner chamber for meditation houses 12 columns. In the center is the largest crystal ball in the world, top left. This is lit by a single shaft of natural light directed from above. The Mandir is in an international township called Oroville, whose stated purpose is to realize human unity. Top right is the symbol of its founder, 12 around 4 around 1, which also symbolizes Divine Mother. Around the base of Mandir are 12 smaller meditation chambers called petals. These colored chambers each correspond to a divine quality. 12 different gardens are in the planning stages, each corresponding to another set of qualities. The picture, bottom left, shows the layout of the 12 gardens around the 12 petals. Each petal is an egg-shaped room, painted in rich fresco color. The petals you see here from the top left clockwise represent sincerity, gratitude, generosity, and courage. A few months ago, I had the privilege of meditating in some of these petals when I was last in Oroville. On the morning of my return to the UK, I meditated in the petal called Courage. I had just received news of John's serious illness. And here again, to finish, is John again, beaming with the wondrous spirit that filled him to the very end. Bottom right, his New Jerusalem diagram is here, something like a star to guide us, and top right, a picture that suggests the golden summer lands of the afterlife. Thank you. And inspiration with an equally great measure of focused and rational grasp of his subjects, and the results were often astonishing. John was a leading light in several fields. Given the nature of his production, it's a great honor to have worked with him as a collaborator. Here you see him holding the manuscript for How the World is Made. This is his only book that remains unpublished. Besides the many people that John has influenced, he's had a very interesting history of collaborations with artists, designers, and researchers, including Richard Adams, Una Woodruff, Bob Rickard, John Neal, Marilee Harper, Robin Heath, and Alan Brown, a very illustrious crew. I know that John regretted the delay in publication of this particular manuscript, and we, at the very least, very deeply regret that John is no longer with us. So to make myself feel a little bit better about this loss, I've made up a fantasy, a little story, and it goes like this. Not gone, just temporarily dematerialized, as you can see. He's standing under a red light. This was taken more or less at the same time as the other ones, but there was a red light above. Very typical stance of John, as you can see, with his cigarette. In this picture, John's standing next to a photo of the Rosette Nebula, That's a star-forming region in the constellation Monoceros. And I've put that there to symbolize John's ability to inspire and to catalyze. Right, so before I actually start my talk, because this is a very special Megalithomania meeting here, Michell has just passed on into spirit. The whole conference is dedicated to him. And so before I start my talk, I'd like to ask, first of all, how many of you here knew John personally or had seen him speak or had seen him walking around Glastonbury? How many people knew John? The majority. Great, okay. And how many of you have read at least one of the following titles? The View Over Atlantis, The New View Over Atlantis, Dimensions of Paradise, or City of Revelation? Okay, the majority. Okay, great. I mean, it's okay if you haven't, but I was just kind of curious about that. Okay, so these pictures are of a man you know very well. It's John Michell. They were taken at a cafe in London in 2007 on the Portobello Road, actually. And in the lower right is something that's probably very familiar to you. That's the New Jerusalem diagram for which John is so well known. In that diagram, the number 1080, or 1080, plays a very important role, and if you've read John's work, you know about that. This number represents intuition and inspiration. As a writer, John combined a huge amount of intuition in that way. Okay, great. The ideal cosmological pattern, that's the New Jerusalem diagram we saw earlier, was applied in the organization of traditional societies in many parts of the world. Okay. Cosmologically ordered societies are aligned with the unchanging truth of mathematics and its expressions in nature, as author Michael Schneider has so well said. Hello? Okay, the universal 12 tribes, okay, all over the world, there are records and traditions of nations divided into 12 tribes and 12 regions. Each tribe and each region corresponded to one of the signs of the zodiac and one of the months of the year. Most widely known are the 12 tribes of Israel, but there have been many others. The purpose of such a structure was to provide unity to traditional societies. The plan was a symbolic chart of the heavens. This was divided into 12 constellations and governed by 12 principal gods. The earth became a mirror of the heavens, as we've been repeating here in different ways for the whole weekend. That is, in essence, one of our branches of study here. The recurrent archetype. The pattern of 12 around 1 is a recurrent archetype. It haunts the imagination, and it always remains a source of inspiration. At the end of my talk, we're going to look at an interesting recurrence in the modern world. Wherever we find the legend of 12 gods, 12 saints, or 12 heroes who sanctified their surroundings, there we may look for an ancient sacred landscape divided into 12 astrological segments. On the left, we see an ancient Roman altar with the 12 gods and goddesses in a circle. The signs of the zodiac are carved on the outer edge of this altar, which is in Paris, actually the original, in the Louvre. To the right are the 12 Greek gods and goddesses, each with a characteristic emblem and connected with a zodiac sign. Systems of 12 gods that corresponded to the division of the year into 12 months and the heavens into 12 astrological houses were adopted in ancient Egypt, Phoenicia, Chaldea, Persia, and throughout the East. This is a view of the Tibetan national flag, a bit blurry, but it's there. The 6 original tribes of Tibet are symbolized by the 6 red rays on this flag. In some accounts, there are said to have been 12 Tibetan tribes. Their representatives formed the Circular Council under the Dalai Lama. On the other side of the world, in the USA, south of the Great Lakes, the Winnebago Indians had a 12-clan society in which 4 superior clans represented the heavenly quarters. This diagram represents the constant. In the upper right-hand corner is the Eagle Nebula. I've put that there to symbolize John's qualities as a far-seeing visionary. The red nebula that looks like a flower on the bottom is the Cat's Eye Nebula, and that's one of the most complex and beautiful ones ever seen, apparently. It represents John's sense of beauty and his keen intelligence. This nebula also features unusual shock-induced knots of gases, and that stands for John's trickster qualities, switching things around, reversing received ideas, and forever turning the tables to reveal the unexpected. Anybody who knew John knows that about him. On the left, you see the cover of the first edition of 12 Tribe Nations and the Science of Enchanting the Landscape. Little ad here, copies are on sale downstairs. Also, most of the other books mentioned in my talk. On the right, you see the cover of the second edition. This just came out in the USA in late 2008 with Inner Traditions. The subtitle was changed to Sacred Number and the Golden Age. John himself always gave 12 tribe nations an important place among all his books. It connects 2 of his major works, The View Over Atlantis and The Dimensions of Paradise. It shows how the ideal cosmological pattern sorry, oops, okay, right, I don't have to bend down.